Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is home and warm and toasty warm on this beautiful day. Uh, the question I want to discuss this morning is one that is being debated in various court systems around the country, and that is when Uber was introduced, the taxi drivers in New York City and other places objected, and because it was unfair competition to them. They felt that Uber was cutting into their business. So, what I'd like to explore, I don't know if I'll come to a conclusion or not, is to whether or not Uber drivers are considered workers or contractors. And there's a difference in halacha and in general law as well. Uh, Uber regulates who can drive, uh, and they can dismiss somebody who doesn't follow their particular rules. Uh, in most large cities, taxi drivers are regulated by the city and taxi licensing bureau. They pay a license fee. I know in New York, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a medallion in some cases to have the right to pick up passengers and charge for them. The taxi owners are opposed to Uber because they take away their parnasa. It's a question of unfair competition. So that's one issue to talk about, unfair competition. The other issue is that a California judge issued a ruling that Uber drivers are considered employees rather than contractors. And the practical difference is that if they are employees, then Uber has to pay for the driver's expenses, gas, wear and tear of the car, etc. So that's another discussion we have to have. So let's deal with the competition issue first within a halachic setting. In Talmudic times, there was a discussion about a mavui, an alleyway. If you have an alleyway where the homes open up into the alleyway, streets go into the alleyway, and if I live on one end of the alley and I have a business outside my house, can somebody else open up a similar business on the other end of the alleyway? And it's a machlokas, depending on whether or not you can get in and out from both ends. If you can get in and out from both ends of the alleyway, then perhaps it will be permissible. If it's a dead end alley and people will participate they'll buy from the guy at the open end, they'll never get down to the other end where the guy was there first. So that would be unfair competition. There's a brisa in the Gemara, Bava Basra, that talks about fishermen. A fisherman cannot put his nets near another fisherman's nets, so he doesn't catch the other guy's fish. And this is the basis for the laws against unfair competition. Because as Rashi points out, once the fish see the bait, they'll go to the one that's closest to them. And the second guy has to keep his distance in order to avoid this. The Gemara then goes into a machlokas tanoim and relates the fisherman's story to opening up business on a street where somebody else has a similar business. And it's not resolved necessarily. There's a big machlokas. Also, it depends on whether or not the other business, the new business that comes in, is he a local resident or is he an outsider? Does he pay taxes locally or not? And this is a factor also. If he pays taxes, even if he doesn't live locally, he can open up the business. But there are residency requirements. Generally, Uber drivers are local, so that deals with that particular issue. If you pay taxes, whether or not you're a resident, that qualifies to allow you to open up a business in a non-competitive way. And then there's a very fine line as to what's considered competitive or not. Also, it depends, according to some Rishonim, if the new vendors that are coming in, if they benefit the local population. If the first guy was selling inferior products or he was charging too much and the other guy comes in with a better product or a lower price, that's another factor to take into consideration. So again, Uber service versus taxi service, these are the issues that within a halakhic context we have to analyze. Again, pricing is a factor in terms of the businesses, in terms of unfair competition, but also in terms of taxis versus Uber. The Ramban feels that the rules are put in place to protect the local vendors. And however, if the consumers want better prices, then they can bring in other vendors. So it's balanced on one hand to protect the vendors, but they have to offer a quality service to the local people. If there are better prices, a better merchandise, then it's the options are open to open up the business. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch, after going through all the various views of the various Rishonim, paskins that an outsider cannot set up shop in a town unless he pays local taxes. So that's the entranceway. In other words, if you pay local taxes, now here the question is, who pays the taxes? Does the Uber company pay the taxes or does the individual employee? And that depends on whether or not an Uber driver is an employee or a contractor. If he's in business for himself as a contractor, then he pays all of his own taxes. If he works for the Uber company, then they pay his taxes. It comes out of his check, but they pay for it. So it's a difficult machlokas. The Ramah, however, who paskins for Ashkenazic Jewry, says that local shop owners or local businesses can prevent new competitors from entering. They can prevent him. However, once he's already there, they can't kick him out. It's a very strange Ramah. If you already set up shop, that puts somebody out of business by undercutting his prices and so forth, that very clearly is prohibited. So if the purpose of Uber to provide this particular service is to undercut the taxi industry, then that would be prohibited. And Uber exists, all over the world now. So there are a number of qualifications and halachic terms.
Rabbi,
yeah.
In terms of setting up businesses, is there a set distance between business A and business B? I remember in Elizabeth, the great Rabbi Tights. I think he was still alive. I think he or his son decided there was a shop right in Elizabeth. This goes back years and years, that was going to have a whole kosher section with a counter, and they could slice your deli or whatever. And that was just a couple blocks away from Elmora Avenue, where you had, kosher butchers and the kosher, well, now there's a kosher Chinese, all these other things. And people were shocked that he gave a heter, because if you're already in ShopRite, then of course you're going to go there. It's much more convenient than, trying to find parking. So is there a distance?
There's no physical distance, but the Ramah in the Tshuva writes that ruinous competition is prohibited. So if somebody sets up shop in a way that's guaranteed to put someone else out of business, that will be prohibited, which, as I mentioned before, I don't understand. We had a situation in Teaneck. There was a small butcher shop, a very fine butcher shop, who just expanded because he was getting a lot of business. And then, what's this called? Casino Farms opened up that big market right across the street from him. What's it called? Cedar Market, right across the street from him. And literally put him out of business. How the RCBC allowed that, I don't know. I mean, it literally goes against the Ramah's direct psak. You want to have competition, fine, but ruinous competition is prohibited.
Did they allow it, Wally?
Yes.
Did they have a voice in it?
Yes, the RCBC said it was okay. They said Hasagas Gavul doesn't apply anymore. because there's enough of a market to sustain both.
Maybe they got a big contribution.
That I doubt. But there's enough people to support both of them. But if one guy's prices are so much better simply because they're much larger and they had a lot of money. I mean, Cedar Market is owned by a group called Casino Farms in Queens, and they own a whole string of kosher supermarkets. So it's a big business, and they can afford to keep lower prices and put the small guy out of business. I mean, I love going. He was the only butcher in all of Bergen County that sold bison, which is healthier than beef. He's only, but now he had just expanded his store, and he was not that big. Very fine guy from France, very nice butcher. In any event, the rabbis have to take responsibility, and sometimes their decisions might be counterintuitive, like Rabbi Teitz, like the RCBC, where the small guy gets hurt. And he says very clearly, if it's guaranteed to put somebody else out of business, you can't do it. That's one tshuva. Rav Yosef Shaul Nathanson, another tshuva, talks about if a person purchased a license from the government to open up a shop, and another guy opens up a shop without a license, can the legal guy report the other guy? And that opens up other issues in terms of informing on somebody else. But clearly, if the government's purpose is to limit the number of businesses in a certain area, then the license holder does have a valid claim against the guy who is a license, like the taxi industry. You buy these medallions at tremendous high prices, which allows you to pick up passengers and charge them for the service. And another group coming in is in direct competition with that and would seem to be prohibited. The purpose of a license is not necessarily to limit the number of businesses, but since the cost of the license is so prohibitive, it's self-limiting. And somebody else comes in without paying a license to the exact same business, that was considered, like the Ramah says, a ruinous competition, you might say. So these are issues that within a halakhic context we have to think about. Are Uber drivers who live locally competing with the taxi drivers, or is the Uber company the competitor? And it depends on what the status is. Are they considered a poel or a kabbalah, a contractor or a worker? So how do we apply these particular piskei halacha to this ongoing dispute between Uber and the various taxi companies in the cities where they operate? And there are a number of different employer-employee relationships we find in the Gemara. A poel, for example, a worker, daily worker, is allowed to quit in the middle of the day, whereas a contractor cannot. And there are a number of different issues and definitions that the Gemara gives, differentiating between a worker and a contractor. If you have to work during specific hours, you're considered a poel, a worker, as opposed to a contractor. And there are differences. If you get paid by the hour, you're a worker as opposed to being a contractor. You're paid by the job, which Uber drivers are. You are a kabbalah. Taxi driver, if you own your own medallion, then you make whatever you make. If you work for a company, usually a company owns a medallion and they hire several different drivers or many different drivers to work for them. Those drivers are paid probably by the hour plus a percentage of the fares. But they work within certain hours. They work shifts, whereas a Uber driver can work all day and all night if he chooses to, and he can chooses to accept or not to accept a fare. Whereas a taxi driver also has that option, but it's in their interest to pick up more people. So it's a very gray area. There's a fascinating discussions here. Is a chazan considered a poel or a worker or a contractor? He has to work certain hours. and even though he gets paid weekly or monthly, but he has to work only during the time where he can daven, like Shabbos or Yom Tov or whatever it might be. Interesting discussion there too. And according to U.S. labor law, a salaried employee gets paid for the job that he does, not necessarily for the hours that he works. If he's a manager, for example, it's not a 9 to 5 job. He doesn't get paid extra for the additional time. Uber is a very gray area. That's the problem. A driver gets paid on distance and time. However, the price of each Uber trip is determined in advance. So in that regard, he might be considered a contractor. On the other hand, he can't complete the job whenever he wants. He has to do it at a certain time, which makes him a poel. So you have arguments in favor of both of these statuses, as poel or kabbalah, worker versus contractor.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Would there be any difference, because you were talking about comparing Uber to tax, would there be any halachic difference between Uber and I think one of the other companies is like Lyft?
Lyft is
like
Lyft, no. Lyft and Uber are pretty much the same. They
right.
work
So in other words, my question is, halachically, is it more of an issue for somebody to establish Lyft in an area where there already exists Uber because they are more the same type of thing as opposed to Uber versus taxi?
Well, see, Lyft and Uber, I would say, are permissible areas of competition.
Oh, okay.
That's not but Lyft and Uber versus the taxi industry, that's a bigger problem. Because the taxi industry pays a lot of money for the right to pick up passengers. And it really cuts into their income. So it's a serious problem, which has not been sufficiently determined. It's been analyzed, but not necessarily determined because we can't really clarify whether or not the Uber and Lyft drivers are considered workers or contractors. And again, as I said, the difference would be if they are, as the California judge decided, that they are workers, that means that the company has to pay for their expenses, their benefits, and so forth, which changes the whole dynamic of the business and puts them at a disadvantage. Whereas if they are considered contractors, independent contractors, then the company is off the hook for all those extra expenses that they would have to pay under those circumstances. So it's a very gray area, and the Gemara also leaves it in the gray area because there are many different categories of workers, and it's in some cases they're considered a poel, in some cases they're considered a kablan, and different halachos apply depending on what the status is. And as I say, it remains a gray area. I don't know offhand if any piskei halacha have been issued in this matter. In other words, if can a frum person become an Uber or a Lyft driver if it violates hasagas gvul, if it violates unfair competition, if it violates other categories of halacha. So that's a gray area that I don't know if it's been completely analyzed or not. I have to get back to you on a different shiur to find out if there are any piskei halacha in that area that make an official determination. But there's another area which is easier to determine. If a woman is about to give birth, is Uber the best option to take on Shabbos? Interesting question. Now that there are piskei halacha, and many people are faced with this issue when a woman is in her final stages of pregnancy, and it could be that she has to go rush to the hospital on a Shabbos. Again, you can set up with Uber in advance. You have an Uber account. You can set it up for a specific location, my house to the hospital, and all I have to do is press one or two buttons on a smartphone. Payment is already deducted automatically, and you don't have to worry about calling somebody or paying the driver. So other than the fact that somebody might not be comfortable with an Uber driver versus a regulated taxi driver, other than that, that would seem to be the easiest way to go to get someone to the hospital on a Shabbos, or not only a pregnant woman, anybody who has to go to the hospital on Shabbos. Now, again, bear in mind, if we're talking about a situation where there is a life-threatening medical condition, then all bets are off. I mean, you don't have to be concerned with Shabbos if you're dealing with saving a person's life. If it's a serious illness, a person is in danger, and pregnancy theoretically could be potentially hazardous. So even though you might try to minimize any type of chilul Shabbos in order to get to the hospital, halachically you don't have to. There's the very famous story. I think I may have mentioned it once before, with I think it was the Beis Yosef, Rav Soloveitchik's great grandfather, and on a Friday night in Brisk, they saw him running through the streets on a Friday night, holding a candle, bareheaded. The great Beis Halevi is Machal Shabbos, Begili Rosh. What's going on? And it turned out that somebody came to his house and said, "What should we do?" His wife is in labor, and the house is dark. They didn't have electricity. So he right away grabbed the candle and he ran through the streets. And in running through the streets, his yarmulke blew off. But he didn't stop to pick it up because a woman's life was at risk. So we learned a very important halacha. And even though people didn't understand what they were seeing, the fact remains, you don't ask questions. If it's sakonas nefashos, then chilul Shabbos is secondary. You're machal one Shabbos in order to observe further Shabbos. So clearly, even though in most cases, pregnancy is not necessarily life-threatening, whenever possible, if you can minimize chilul Shabbos, you should. It doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean you have to. Again, for even a regular chola, in some cases, you can be machal Shabbos. But a woman about to give birth, again, if you want to minimize, do things with the shinui. Dial the phone with your left hand rather than your right hand, if you want to be that makpid. But clearly, even though today giving birth is less hazardous than it's been in the past, nevertheless, you are allowed to be machal Shabbos to get into the hospital.
Wally.
Yeah, Nathan, the question?
Yeah. You have to take into consideration that the Uber driver might be Jewish, and you're causing him.
So that's always a possibility. Yes, that's always a possibility. I don't know how you could control that unless you specifically ask for a certain driver, which you can do. But clearly,
Ask for an Arab.
Yeah,
could
be.
Get around calling, if you needed Hatzalah, and they're all Jewish.
Yeah.
So the idea is that they're helping someone in an emergency. So that's the heter.
That's not only is that the heter, but when Hatzalah first began, and even earlier than that, if you have a frum doctor who has to go to the hospital for an emergency situation, does he have to stay in the hospital until Shabbos is over, or can he go home? And Rav Moshe Paskin, when Hatzalah started, that the Hatzalah drivers are allowed to drive home afterwards, to allow them to be ready in case another emergency happens. But it would seem to be counterintuitive. If there's an emergency, you can be machal Shabbos and go to the hospital. But if there's no emergency, then what's the heter to allow you to be machal Shabbos and drive home? And again, you can drive home with a shinui. You can there are all kinds of things you can do. But the fact is that he said, by allowing you to drive home, you are in effect allowing you to save potential lives if somebody else needs them. But clearly, even for people that are not seriously ill, we say in Mameh Madlikin every Friday night that if a chola needs a candle, you light the candle. Even if a chola is blind, it's interesting. If a sick person is blind, and he says, "I want you to light a candle so that people who come to me can see and help me," you're allowed to do that.
Just tell them.
Yeah, all right. You can cook food for a chola on Shabbos. You can call an ambulance on Shabbos, even though there might be a neighbor who could drive, but that would cost him to be away for the high Shabbos, and he may not have a header to go back. If electric wires fall in a pub, like today, for example, all the heavy snow, trees might fall down, wires might come down, and if it happened on Shabbos, you could call the electric company to tell them there's a wire down that could cause danger potentially. So pikuach now if you want to get involved in lumdus, there's a wonderful machlokas. We can't go into too much detail. Is pikuach nefesh on Shabbos? And is it considered hutra or dechuya? Is it permissible or is it just simply deferred? And those two terminologies, huge literature in this machlokas, whether it's hutra or dechuya. If it's permissible, it's one thing. If it's just being deferred, it's a different halakhic categories are involved. Clearly, let's see, we don't have any indication. For example, if a person needs to be hooked up to an IV on Yom Kippur, for example, obviously you can do that, but a physician should do it rather than the person himself. Make sure it's done properly. It doesn't mean that, again, there are slight differences in halacha, but it's always easier to err on the side of caution. So we don't mandate, for example, that a woman should rent a room next to the hospital in her 9th month just to be there so she can get taken right over there. There's no obligation to do that. We don't find an obligation for a woman to prepare her belongings before Shabbos. Most people do. Towards the end of the 9th month, most people have a suitcase, a go bag ready to go. But she doesn't have to do that. Clearly, these are extra chumros, and calling a cab versus arranging with Uber is 50-50 in either direction. It may be less chilul Shabbos if you arrange the Uber than by calling a taxi, but it's simply not required in terms of pikuach nefesh. So Uber does have an advantage where you could arrange it in advance, but you could also arrange it in advance with a taxi company as well. So it's 6 to 1, half dozen of the other. But all of these contemporary issues are being debated. I have to find out what the Piskei Halacha are in each of these cases, because some of these situations did exist before, but perhaps not in the same way, but in a similar circumstance. So there are earlier tshuvos that deal with Shabbos, which deal with Poel versus Kabbalah, and we have to apply it to contemporary situations, and that's the challenge facing our poskim today. Not everybody who is knowledgeable in all the sources is necessarily qualified to be a posek. A posek has to have a little bit more sensitivity to be able to put all the pieces together. It's like a puzzle. Psak halacha is like a puzzle. Now, puzzles only have one way to fit. But very often in halacha, you have several different approaches. The job of a posek is to pick an approach. And one guy will poskin one way, another guy will poskin a different way, based on their logic, based on the sources that support them. So my assignment will be to find piskei halacha that deal with these scenarios, other than simply looking up the halachic framework in which to determine what's permissible or not permissible. In the meantime, Uber and taxi drivers are still battling out in the courts, and the final determination as to whether or not they are employees or contractors remains to be seen, other than the state of California. So stay tuned, and maybe in a future shiur we'll revisit this and have some definitive piskei halacha, since it's a relatively new area to determine halachic findings.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Very
Wally,
interesting.
Yes.
Wally, I remember, I think Rabbi Yudin might have brought this up. When you have a case where somebody in shul gets sick,
Right.
right? And you have someone working there who's non-Jewish, right? And it's an emergency. Do you have to now, a person, you don't know where he is. You have to start looking in the shul to find him so he can make the telephone call, or you can go ahead and pick up the phone and call.
You can go ahead.
Don't wait a second. Get onto the phone and call immediately when it's an emergency. You don't have to find a non-Jew to make the call.
Yeah, I mean, again, the shul isn't that big that it should be so hard to find somebody. But if it's a medical emergency and a doctor says, I need an ambulance now, then you don't wait.
You don't have to go find the person to say he'd make the call.
Yeah, I mean, we have enough doctors in shul to make that determination.
They all disagree.
Well, pick one. You pick one.
All right.
Anything else? Okay, stay home and stay safe. Don't go out today.
Yes.
There's a travel ban anyway. You can't go.
The travel ban is enforced. You can't go out today anyway. So,
Wally,